People in life are obsessed with the notion that life should be fair, that things should play out the way they are most likely to play out, the way they will in most instances. And I can relate to this. When something extremely unlikely happens, or everything seems to be going the right way, you've made all these good decisions, and then something comes out of nowhere that's unexpected, that throws a spanner in the works, just destroys everything, maybe even tilts you. Yeah, it feels like you got to focus in on that moment. That's the instant that cost you. You ignore even like decisions you made afterwards and chances to recover. No, it's that moment. If that moment hadn't happened, I just know I would have won. And perhaps you would. Perhaps you would have succeeded. Perhaps something bad wouldn't have happened to you. And so it's human nature. It's understandable why we think this way, why our brains think that way, why our ability to recognize patterns and try to kind of assess the odds and the risk reward of things, why this sort of mechanism, when applied to these instances, trying to reflect upon them, makes us hone in on those particular moments. And in general, there's a logic to it. Like, actually, when you play things out enough, yeah, the most likely outcome does happen most of the time. That's why it's the most likely outcome. Yeah, most of the time you put yourself in good positions, and even some bad luck probably can't totally derail you and totally fuck you up and all the rest of it. The issue is, when this plagues esports, it makes people rewrite history in a manner that's kind of unfair in itself. Like, it takes history, and the the fallacy is that people just selectively choose where should be applied. They don't apply it universally. Now, if they did that, it still wouldn't be of very much use to the world. It'd be an interesting discussion, and you certainly should put in context for these things so someone knows that it was unlikely, that was crazy. This is a good way to speak and think of things because we're being very fair and very rational and using a good model of probabilities, etc., and what likely is meant to happen and how things follow on and cause and effect and all that jazz. The issue is, though, that if you do that, you have to apply it universally to all scenarios that should have, could have, would have. And when you do it, and you do all these should haves of what most likely should have happened, you will find that you don't just change a match. You don't just change a map. You don't just change a game, a tournament. You actually end up in an entirely alternate universe because there are so many instances that should have gone differently, that would have in terms of the likelihoods. And so we would live in we wouldn't live in a totally sci-fi alien world, because yes, a team would have just lost this match and a team would have gone further, etc. And in general, the really great teams would still be there. But in terms of the overall landscape of who'd won what and what tournament, it would be pretty different. There would be a lot of different results, and people don't take that into account because they only want to apply it this one time. And so part of the reason why CSGO in particular is plagued by this kind of thinking is for two reasons. One is the scoring system we use of max rounds, and the other is the economical components. Now, the reason why I say the scoring system, and I don't just say CSGO as a game, is because the scoring system, as I've outlined many times, is artificially forced upon, it is put around the game of Counter-Strike as a way to determine, as a metric as to who wins the game. And the reason I say this is because max rounds means it's just the first person to 16 rounds in regulation. Now, I came from a world where the first rule set in Europe was charges only, where only terrorist side rounds won. Now, the reason why this is interesting is a flaw of max rounds actually always has been it places too much importance on each specific round. So if you are in a really great flow and you win in all these gun rounds, and then the CTs eco you in some mad scenario with a bunch of deagle headshots, that can then throw the whole game off and really decide what later on would be a 16-14 or a 16-13 to their favor as opposed to yours. And that's an issue just with the way max rounds works. It's not an issue if you accept it, but it's just one of the areas of it where it has more variance. Now in charges only, the same scenario, if the CTs just beat you there, you still have all this time left. You can still choose how many attacks to get out of it. If you keep going and you are like the much better team on gun runs, you will win the game still in most cases. It's a different rule set and it's a different way of doing it. Now, I'm not here to debate whether that's better or worse. I've actually done that in a different video before. But the point is, the scoring system here makes people hone in on that one key round that seemed to have spoiled their team's chance of victory. Then there's the economical component, where because we have forced buys, really risky buys, because we have ecos, but then sometimes in CSGO, when we have these powerful pistols, where you can win ecos, and as a result, you can disrupt the enemy's economy, or you can outright win a round and force them back and break their economy sometimes and money fuck them. And then we have the rounds where you have a full buy, and therefore you feel like you should have your best chance. All these aspects really color how people think of the outcome of the round, and therefore how much importance they put upon these things. Then you've got to add in, as I said in terms of the eco one, that rounds and kills aren't in isolation. In max round system and in CSGO, there's a flow of economical impact based on rounds and wins and losses in past rounds and kills and deaths in past rounds. The fallacy here, the should have fallacy, in isolation is not a fallacy. You can apply it one time, you can certainly say it should have, and I think it would have gone differently, and here's the reason why. The should have fallacy, the fallacious aspect to me, is that people choose the convenient moment to them to apply it, and then they don't apply anything. What they'd say, essentially, if you boil it down, is give me one round or one half that I can change, and then make everything else in history, everyone else's life, everyone else's actions, they have to remain the same and always would have gone that way. But I get to change this one thing because I'm going to apply the context of it was more likely that this would happen, and here's some things that were unfortunate and wasn't this lucky, but I'm not ever going to apply that context to anything else, and nobody else should be able to. This is just what should have happened. And so the ultimate example, and this is the reason why this came to mind recently, is the deciding map of the E-League Major. So the map that decided who became the champions. And it wasn't Virtus.pro winning their second championship. They were obviously a fantastic team and perhaps played well enough to win. It was Astralis winning their first ever major title. Now, don't know why I put that in my mouth. Obviously can't talk while eating. Now, when Virtus.pro in the third map were up 13-7 on train, and they were on CT side, if you asked me who should win, I would tell you Virtus.pro should win. They're such a good team. They're in such a dominant position. It's so difficult for the opponent. The opponent is going to have to sometimes get lucky or fortuitous in terms of the selections they make. The opponent's going to have to play extremely high level to have a chance to get back in this game. Virtus.pro probably have to make some mistakes or some poor decisions. Now, as a result, yes, Virtus.pro should have won from this scenario. Then again, though, it's not as though Astralis tripped over and accidentally won 9 out of the next 10 rounds on T side of train. Astralis won with good executes, they won with ballsy calls that read the game and made a really decisive moment, and they won with decisive, high-pressure frags. Now, you know why I outlined those two things? Good executes, ballsy calls, high-pressure frags. Those are all things that Virtus.pro does to win rounds, to win matches, to upset sometimes opponents better than them, to reach semis of majors like they have so many times, and to even be in this particular major, to even be in the semi-final of that particular major. This is a point I'm making here. So when Virtus.pro takes risks, here's a key detail if you want to be a Virtus.pro fan and say should have. Virtus.pro plays a far riskier style of play than Astralis does. They play a far riskier style of play than even SK Gaming does. SK Gaming makes a lot of reads and decisive calls. Virtus.pro plays a very risky style of play, and that's why we love them, because they play with such balls and flair, and they dare to do crazy things and put themselves in ridiculous situations, and sometimes they can get amazing shit out of that, and sometimes it can go totally to shit. It can go totally badly. So if you want to take the benefit of that when it works, and say they're a genius, what a great instinctual, intuitive play, which I would do, you can't then take when it doesn't work and go, it's unlucky. That should have worked, shouldn't it? VP's style, because of this nature, is actually very erratic. That's the reason why, even though in terms of results, they have like consistently results getting up and down, that's the reason why they don't then go all the way and win so often. That's the reason why they'll get to a quarterfinal, a semi-final, and they'll play a really close game against someone, but they'll lose. They take more risks, yes, and when the risks pay off, they can get back in games, they can break opponents back, they can intimidate opponents mentally, but because they take so many risks, they don't win all of them. And some of them they lose, and some of them backfire, and some of them money fuck them, and some of them put them in a bad situation, and some of them give up a round where it would have been the backbreaker how they would have won it, but now they messed up a scenario that a team that played safer would have won in like a 2v2 or a 3v2 by just sticking together and playing the bomb and playing the fundamentals. And the whole point is there's pros and cons to both sides. If you play a very default style, like, by the way, Astralis often does, you will also lose games as a result. You will play a game like they did against Na'Vi on Mirage in the quarterfinals, where they played this fantastic default style. But the difference is Na'Vi were the ones who made the big balls, decisive plays, and Na'Vi actually got, I mean, you won't say lucky, but they got favourable in some of the scenarios and were able to win the map. Despite the fact they're Astralis, it was like, well, we did everything right, we made all the good reads, we played together, people played the angles, people played the fundamentals, we played the bomb, we played the sights, we played the defense, we read, we did rotations, and you still lost the game. So, this is something that we've got to address, because even though VP played fantastically at that point in time, people, when they say should have, completely ignore what happened to Virtus.pro. They notice what happened to Astralis, and they notice when Astralis did a Tech 9 buy, they notice when Astralis did a ballsy play and a rush, and all this. What they totally ignore is that, how did Virtus.pro lose the game? Go back and watch the VOD. Virtus.pro played a totally different style late in that game. Guess what? Because they had a lead, it got to their heads. They played more passive. They thought we've got a lead. It doesn't matter that we lost this round here, forced by. Oh, it doesn't matter that we lost that round. We'll get it on the next gun round. They played a very nonchalant style in that sense. They got ahead of themselves. They thought, well, it's going to happen somehow. They played quite scared at times late in the game. They just played back. They didn't play this aggressive style. Didn't make the same information plays. They just hoped that they would just kill people who came in their crosshair. That's not Virtus.pro style. By the way, that's one of the reasons why Virtus.pro famously on Train, by the way, have actually had a lot of troubles on CT side of Train over their history, but have been amazing on T side and win on the T side. Then you've got to consider that because they were playing so passive, and because they expected it to come to them, if you look at the game, people like Neo, Snacks, amazing playmakers, Pasha was having one of the tournaments of his life, it looked like they all sat around and thought we're so close that surely Bialy's going to get a 2 headshots in a minute. Surely Snacks will get just the right flank on the guy who comes in the sight. Surely Neo will win this 1v1. And it's like they were all looking around, waiting for the other guy to make the play that would win the game. And so as a result, no one made enough plays. Astralis made a lot of plays. Astralis really went all in and risked, by the way, losing the game many, many times. They didn't play their standard default style. And then Astralis, as a result, were the ones that were able to win. Here's what's funny. Astralis won that game the way that VP beats teams that on paper are better than them. By the way, we're not saying that VP's better than Astralis or anything like that. The point is that VP wins in the style, actually, that Astralis used late in that game on Train. And yet Astralis aren't allowed to do that, and VP's somehow not allowed to lose by playing a style that doesn't suit them. Astralis played like champions to win that match. Now, I understand one of the narratives that tricks people is because Device had a really poor first half when they were getting battered, and he got back into it in the second half, but in terms of contributing to the game. Because he's the best player on Astralis and he didn't play that well, people think again. Right, well, since he had his issues, Astralis themselves all had issues, and they all were chokers, and they didn't deserve to win. Glaive made some of the most ballsy, decisive plays we've ever seen in a major final. What, does he not deserve to win as a result of that? Is that not reasonable? Should he not have won in any sense there? Now, part of the reason why I say this is because if we're going to give them should have, if we're going to say VP should have won up 13-7, okay, let's do that for the sake of the premise, okay? We'll say VP should have won when they're up 13-7. But here's the problem. How did we get to Train? How did we get to a third deciding map? Okay, so let's go back to the first map of the series. It was Nuke, and Astralis at 12-12 was on a gun round against Ecos / a low force buy from Virtus.pro. And Virtus.pro had Taz get a number of CZ kills that won them the round, and they went on to win the game from that point in time. Now, if we're going to say should have, then CZ isn't even a weapon you can entirely aim. There's a lot of luck involved in how close you get and how the opponent reacts to what you do. Whether you get a gun from the kill, or whether it's trapped and you can't get to the gun and then it can't do more kills with it as a result. So if you're going to say should have, in terms of Virtus.pro should have won 13-7 up, then surely Astralis should have won this round. So they would have been 13-12 up. They would have still had money. They'd have had a full buy. Now they have a good chance to win Nuke at that point in time. So why do we get to a third map? Well, we did get to the third map. We accept that first map. But for some reason we don't accept the third map's result. If Astralis wins the pistol round on the terrorist side of Overpass, as they did, they have a chance to run up a really big score, and they're a good CT team. But if you remember, they get ecoed back early on. They get beaten out in a scenario that's pretty unlikely, but that's supposed to happen, right? No, should have. If we're applying should have, it shouldn't happen. So 2-0 Astralis, no problem. How would Virtus.pro even be in the final and then be in the third map and then apply should have to beat Astralis if you go back and look at their previous two series? And in the quarterfinals, they were in the deciding map against North. It was Cobblestone. Now, they lost the first half on terrorist side 3 rounds to 12. Now, who here thinks that Virtus.pro should have won that game? Which they did. They did an amazing comeback, and they won by the smallest of margins. I mean, if we're going to apply should have, that is an overwhelming example of where North should have won. Therefore, Virtus.pro would be out of the tournament. It would be North versus SK in the semi-finals. But it wasn't. That's not what happened. We accept that that VP they played a legendary play, and then they get rewarded for it, and we say, great, well done. Then Virtus.pro played against SK. They had all these close games, these overtime games, these games where it was decided by amazing 1v2s and crazy shots, like that one that Neo hit onto Fallen on Train. Should all these things have happened? I mean, if we're going to say should have, maybe SK should have won one of those maps. Maybe it should have gone to the third map. Maybe SK should have won those games. We'd really have to go back over the VODs and really study like who was in advantageous positions, who made the lucky plays, who made the unlikely plays, how the round should have played out. There's a lot of shoulds going on here that mean that Virtus.pro wouldn't even be in the final, but no one wants to apply should have them because they respect Virtus.pro, because the style of play appeals to them, because they like to see the risks work out, as we all do. But you got to accept when the risks don't work out. So here's the thing. All of these wins, all of these rounds are legit. Yes, some of them should have happened or shouldn't have happened. Some of them were more likely, some of them were less likely. But we have to accept them in as much as how we interpret them. So the point is, when something should have happened, yes, it's perfectly fine to say Virtus.pro was good enough to win that tournament. It's fine to say Virtus.pro put themselves in a fantastic situation to win that tournament. It's fine to even say, if you really want to say this is a little bit of a stretch, but I think it's fine to say, Virtus.pro is a team that if we want to talk how great they were of all time, in a way, in their mind, you could say they are like a multiple major winning team. Now, they didn't win more than one, but the way they played in this one and the past one, and how many times they've been to the quarters at semis, they're as good as some of the teams that have won multiple. Like, I would say Virtus.pro is better than the core of Envious that won 2 majors. Virtus.pro's only won 1 major. That's reasonable because we're not just taking one round and letting it obscure all of history. Yeah, we're saying that round counts and congrats, you get a major, but we played fantastically well within that. We're trying to interpret things in a reasonable manner. The point is, no one should act as though everything had to happen, but also no one should act as though there is no context of why things should. It's that if we're going to apply should, we've got to apply it to everything. So ultimately, yeah, people take chances, some pay off, some don't. We have to evaluate them in isolation, yes, because we want to know if they should or shouldn't, and we want to see how people could play differently, but we also have to view it in the totality. So if you view it in the totality, it's hard to say should have for Virtus.pro in the third map against Astralis without looking at what happened to them against North, without looking at their really great games where they got the ball bounced their way against SK Gaming, a really tough series. Life itself, this is the secret to this concept and how you shouldn't let this be the thing where you focus in on one thing and make out like if that didn't happen, all of the other things don't matter, because if we just change that, life changes. Here's the reason why. Because life itself is unfair in isolation, in single moments. There's times that 1 out of 10 chance happens and you had the 9 out of 10 chance, and that feels bullshit. That feels so unfair. But you know why it is fair? Because if you have a 9 out of 10 chance, on many occasions, you are going to win a lot of those occasions. Say you have 100 chances and you had 90% chance in all of them. Well, we all know you are going to win roughly 90%. Or let's put it this way, you're going to win the majority of those instances. It would be massively statistically unlikely that you don't win the majority of those situations. So this is the issue, I think, with the should have thing when it's applied, because I think sometimes it's applied unfairly. Like in Virtus.pro's case, they are an all-time great team. They're an amazing team. They play a very risky style, but sometimes it works for them. But there's also a reason they haven't won like 6 majors. They've been there in all those semis. They've lost a lot of close games. They've lost to the champions. They've lost in close games to the champions. They actually lose in close games to champions more often than they win against champions. So I think overall, yeah, they could have won this one. But I think all in all, it feels like the ball bounced fairly evenly, given all the majors they played. They played 10 majors. Feels like in the end, they got theirs. They won theirs. They were close to winning one now. They might have won other ones, but they didn't. And maybe they'll win a future one. That's how good they are as a team. They don't need to have to have won that one round against Astralis. They don't have to have won that one map against Astralis to define their careers. That moment will not and does not define their careers. So there's the principle. Life is fair in as much as everyone gets some opportunities. We don't all get even opportunities, but we all get some opportunities. And given enough opportunities, people who are really good will succeed, provided they are good. Of course, someone can succeed who is worse than you. But the point is, that's only going to happen over a short period of time. You follow out their career, and they might succeed in the short term, but if you're much better than them, and you both play a long career, they will have less success elsewhere that will show the through line that you were actually better overall. Or you were better more days of your life or more tournaments of your life. Just like Virtus.pro, as I said, was actually better for more days of their life probably than the Envious cause. It was a pretty reasonable statement, I think. If we're going to go with should have, I could do a whole article series on this, but I'll give you a few that are basic ones. And this will show you how should have applied fairly and evenly radically changes just CS history in terms of who wins the tournament. Not who's very good, like all these teams made finals and top fours. They'd still be very good. But think about this. The first Fnatic lineup that won major at DreamHack Winter 2013, the first ever major, never won another tournament. It was Fnatic with JW, Flusher, Schneider, Devil Walk, Pronax. They should not have won this major. Very games on Nip should have, and so since Nip was in the final, it was the third map, Nip should have won this major. So there would be no Fnatic winning that first major. JW and Flusher maybe would have 2 majors right now. Very games shouldn't have gone out in the group stage of EMS Katowice 2014. Them losing on Inferno to Hellraisers, very unlikely, very close game. Smiths, for whatever weird reason, made some crazy, like didn't do his homework or something mad like that. This probably shouldn't have happened. So very games make it to the playoffs, and now who knows what happens. They were one of the best teams in the world in series at that point in time. NIP shouldn't have won ESL 1 Cologne 2014. They probably should have lost to Cloud9, then they probably should have lost to LDLC, then they probably should have lost to Fnatic. So any of those 3 teams could have won that tournament. And how does that change things if Fnatic in their second tournament win the major? How does it change things if LDLC with Happy win the major? Maybe the French shuffle doesn't happen. How about if Cloud9 goes to the final of the major and plays Fnatic there? And an NA team was in the final years before, 2 years before, Simple comes along and helps Team Liquid. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, if we want to talk about the polls, Neo and Taz, Neo's teams in 1.6 often were the underdog against the great teams and won by being clutch, by having decisive plays, by having Neo. There was times that they had some of the most unlikely, improbable comebacks of all time. There's a famous video, I'll link it here if I can find it. It's the one where ESL made it. It's like Counter-Strike, esports is more than a game or something. And it's where Virtus.pro wins a match. And at the end of the match, after winning it, they start breaking down, crying, calling their families, and they're distraught. Yet they won the match. Now, here's what a lot of people don't know about that. They didn't win that tournament. That wasn't the final. That was the semi-final. But what happened was they were playing against an SK Gaming team that should have won the game. That in the third map were an economical advantage, where had a key situation where they would have broken them completely, and Virtus.pro had to make all these crazy calls, these crazy econ buys, these ridiculous plays, come through in impossible situations, and they managed as a result to win from a ridiculous disadvantage, a ridiculous economical disadvantage in the game, where any moment just decides the game in the favor of their opponent. And that's why they were so emotional, because they knew in this moment we shouldn't have won this. This is unbelievable. How have we done this? How has this happened again? Like, this is just it's surreal. And that's why they were so emotional. And by the way, like I said, they went to the final. Actually, they got beaten by a small margin, but convincingly as a result by Na'Vi, and they didn't win that tournament. Actually, it was in 2011 when Na'Vi won their 4th major, IEM World Championship, Season 5. So the list goes on and on, but the key detail, as I've pointed out, is greatness bears itself out despite small instances where things could have gone differently. So until Peyton Manning, all-time great NFL quarterback, I think it was like 4 or 5-time MVP of the league, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in the NFL. Until his last season, he only had 2 Super Bowl rings. Now, ignoring stuff like what defense did he play with, what was his coach like, what conference did he play in, all those factors that could definitely play an impact in how many times you get to the Super Bowl, how many opportunities you get. Ignoring all of that, he only had 1 Super Bowl ring. Now, I don't know anyone who's an expert about the NFL and a reasonable person who thought that his brother, Eli Manning, a much worse quarterback, not necessarily a Hall of Fame quarterback, maybe he will because of the rings now, I don't know how that works in the NFL, who played for much worse teams, but who managed to win 2 rings, some of it with incredible fashion, the David Tyree catch, obviously, against the Giants, against the Patriots, some of it in ridiculous fashion. I don't know anyone who thought Eli Manning was a better quarterback than Peyton Manning. Maybe they said Tom Brady is, or Joe Montana, or whatever. No one said Eli Manning's better than, but he had 2 championship rings, and Peyton Manning had 1. That's the point. Greatness bears itself out. The rest of their careers show that Peyton Manning was the much better player. Likewise, okay, in tennis, Marsan Cilic, I think he's from Croatia, won the 2014 US Open. He won a Grand Slam title. Now, there's a player in tennis where, if you know a lot about tennis, you will know that the player David Ferrer, who's this amazing, like, fitness-based, hard-working, like, plays the points well, tries to win ugly style almost, grinder from Spain, has never won a Grand Slam title. But he's been to final, he's been to a bunch of semis, he's been to tons of quarters. His career dwarfs Marsan Cilic's. Yet Marsan Cilic is a champion in a way David Ferrer has never been a champion. The greatness bears itself out. So you know what? Fnatic, who won that first DreamHack Winter, the first ever major, not the first DreamHack Winter, the first major, a DreamHack Winter 2013, that Fnatic lineup is not better than the TSM lineup that never won a major, the Danish TSM lineup of 2015. That lineup won 5 championships. Fnatic won 1, and it happened to be the major. There was tons of wins for big teams for that Fnatic. They had top 8 at 3 straight majors. They had top 4 at a major. They were a fantastic team. They were better than that Fnatic. Greatness bears out because should have is only ever applied in this sense in small instances. In your whole career, mostly the things that should have happened do happen.